this video is about the differences between houses versus signs. Now, I sometimes get this question of, well, are they interchangeable? Is Mercury in Aries the same as having Mercury in the first house? And I can understand why people may have that question, because I do think that earlier on, even when I was first learning about the ins and outs of astrology, birth charts and things like that, it can be easy early on when you're first learning to kind of make that association, right? So if somebody has Mercury in Taurus, there is a level of practicality in how they speak or how they deliver certain things, right? So if someone has Mercury in the second house, does that kind of have the same energy to it, where there is a groundedness in their expression, right, verbally? And you could argue that there is, but here's what I'm gonna start off by saying before I lose anybody. The house in astrology is the events. These are the themes. The sign is are the traits that the person embodies. Okay, it's like putting a bubbly person. If you put a bubbly person in a certain setting, that can influence how that bubbly, right, that energy expresses. If you put a very quiet person in a certain setting, they may still be quiet. Or if you put them in their element, maybe they're not as quiet. So traits that we have, right, our sign, Mercury in Leo, Sun in Virgo, Mars in Aquarius, whatever you are, the traits can be altered a little bit based on where that house is placed. Whereas with any person, let me give a good example. A moon in Pisces person is going to be sensitive no matter what, right? There is a sensitivity. There is a need to feel understood. There is this level of compassion they often have. There is this need to connect to things and that are meaningful and purposeful, and there's an awareness. Now, unless you have like a person who's got Pisces energy and they're like the suffering type, or the like, I feel like I'm suffering type, for the most part, Pisces energy is aware of like, I want to connect to people and things that are important outside of myself, and I don't want these superficial types of connections, right? But there's a sensitivity to that. So wherever you put the moon in Pisces, you're going to get that. Now, if you put the moon in Pisces in the 5th house, you're going to get this energy is now applied to the things they enjoy doing, right? The activities, the fun, the pleasures, right? If you put the moon in Pisces in the 12th house, well, you're going to get, right, in the home, in its home. Well, Pisces in the 12th house, well, now you have a person way more interconnected with compassion, with feeling a deeper need to have profound spiritual experiences. A person who can be like that person who, the moon in Pisces in the 5th house, it might be more of a performative person, whereas your 12th house person could be equally talented in some regard, but it's to heal. I want to heal people. Say if you have a musician moon in Pisces or any placement with 12th house, I want to do this because I want people to feel what I'm feeling, and I can't express it sometimes in words when I'm in the 12th house. So I want them to feel what I'm feeling. But the moon in Pisces in the 5th house, especially if there's other placements, now you have performer. Maybe this is a person who knows they can reach people. This is a very different agenda. So we do have to take into account the differences here. Okay. Now, again, people will use it interchangeably. I'm not going to lie. I have before in the past, especially earlier on in my astrological journey, because as you're learning, it is kind of the same energy. And even when I do chart interpretation, a person may have a 6th house energy, and I'll mention like, okay, here's your placements. Let's analyze the placement. Let's look at your aspects, all these things. The 6th house is a Virgo type energy, but I can't analyze that placement like it is Virgo. Right? If you have Jupiter and Aquarius in the 6th house or something like that, that's not the same as being a Virgo, unless you are, if you're a Virgo and there's already a Virgo in energy to your chart. So that's deeper, right? That's when we're talking about interpretation. But houses and signs, once you get to a certain level in astrology, they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. Okay? Because you have to understand the house is the events. It's the themes. Okay? If the theme of the 12th house has to do with imagination, partially, spirituality, things like that, once you put Mercury there, so for example, a Mercury in Leo. Okay, now Mercury in Leo tends to have a good sense of humor, very gregarious sense of humor, likes to laugh, could be the life of the party. When you put that Mercury and Leo in that 5th house or that 3rd house, that person is going to be very vocal, very out there, very outgoing sometimes, and trying to entertain people with what they say. Now, 3rd versus 5th is going to be different, right? Of why? 5th house is more entertained. The 3rd house would maybe be a little bit more about a person who's trying to garner some level of attention for what they know, for what they say. 3rd house is Mercury, right? Ruled. 12th house, the Mercury person is not as expressive, or they're more selective in their expression, or they need more time to gather what they need to say, or they're not doing it to perform. So when a Mercury and Leo and 12th house person is being funny, it's not for a performance. It's different. So when you have your Mercury and Leo people, what I notice is always the same. There's an enthusiasm in how we speak. I'm Mercury and Leo. There's an enthusiasm in how we speak, in our tone, in our inflection of what we say. There's a confidence in what we say. There's a belief that what we're saying is something that we have some type of authority on. Okay. Now, I don't speak on the things I don't have authority on, but if I know what I know, I know what I know, right? But depending on where that Mercury is going to indicate where areas of life do you have that impact, right? So for me, my confidence is in anything that I intricately know and sense and can really direct. If I don't know something, I'm not going to be like some people and say, oh, I'm going to talk about topics I know nothing about, which you can sometimes see with Mercury and Leo in other placements. Mercury and Leo is also, some of them are the comedian type, but you would find the house is going to help you understand the expression of the traits. Okay. It's like when you go to a house, every house has a vibe to it. Every house has house rules. You go to grandmom's house, you go to, uncle's house, you go to your friend's house, you go to someone's house, you go to someone you never met's house, and they're a friend of a friend. There's different rules. There's different energy there. There's different things that go down in different houses. There are certain things that are acceptable some places and not others. That's astrology. Think of astrology in that way. And the traits. So if a person think of a person who is very, a person who is very religious, but they sometimes don't feel like other people understand them. But all of a sudden you put them in a certain space with someone else who's equally religious, and there you see a different energy start to come about, right? It's because you put the person in a new environment. Whereas, let's say they're very religious or belief driven, but they have, let's say, Mars and Sag in the 11th house, and a lot of their conflict or maybe 9th house, a lot of conflict happens when trying to engage with other people. But then they meet someone else that has the same kind of path or energy as them. So that's the thing you have to understand about it, is that the house is going to indicate what happens, what goes down, what's the theme here. But the sign, the traits. So when we analyze astrology, just because your friend also has Venus in Pisces doesn't mean anything. If their Venus in Pisces is in the 11th house, that's going to be very different in how they view relationships. Let's say you have Venus in Pisces in the 8th house. Well, you're seeking something probably a little deeper. You're going to attach a little bit deeper to the things that you desire and want. Whereas Venus in 11th house can be more whimsical. There's more, everything's an opportunity, let's try everything, give everything a chance, because everything has intrinsic value, right? That's a different energy. So I do think that when we look at signs, we look at certain traits, there's always going to be something that's similar. Just like if somebody plays sports, if someone is a basketball player, you have to know how to play. You have to know the basics. So we're going to know, if you play basketball, all of you should know these different moves, right? If you play baseball, all of you should know these different moves. If you play an instrument, depending on what the instrument is, everyone knows how to read these music notes, right? So the baseline is the sign, this placement, right? Mars in Leo, Mercury in Virgo, Sun in Libra, whatever the case may be. But then once we take those traits and we put them in different houses, now it is charged. It's different. It's a different charge going on there. Okay. It's a different energy frequency, and certain houses are going to be conducive to it working. If you have somebody, and I just come up with these randomly, if someone has, their moon in Sagittarius, the third house, well, that's going to be very different than someone having their moon in Sagittarius in the ninth house, where now they're emotionally charged to feel that their experiences are validated through their beliefs. Whereas the third house may be more interested in learning about those things that feel very much aligned to their sense of truth. So this might be a person more interested in only reading about things that interest them from what they believe. Like, oh no, I don't believe in that, right? I'm not diving into those different topics. I know what I like, right? Whereas you have Gemini, which is going to be more of that curiosity. But once you put that moon in Sag in the ninth house, well, now Sagittarius is at home, and it's going to be more inclined to want to speak its beliefs, speak its truth. And it's going to feel more connected to people who are accepting of that truth, right? When you put the moon in the third house, there is more of a need to investigate, to think about it, to probe, to have a bigger sense of learning about certain things, right? Whereas your ninth house is going to be where you're now headed in a certain direction. You believe something. Your life is living in accordance to that, as opposed to just being about what you think or just being about what you want to explain to people. It's a little bit more personal. If we put, now, third house is personal in terms of like neighborhood, early learning, schooling. But with ninth house, your beliefs, that's where Sagittarius gets really self-righteous. You know what I mean? That ninth house, where it can be great for being influential and for the way in which it encourages people to have certain types of mindsets. But you have to, you can be careful with that. Even if a sign is in the house it rules, that doesn't mean it's perfect, right? So I don't want to go too far into that. Point being, houses and signs, once you get to the more advanced type of astrology, it is not interchangeable. When I am interpreting a chart, no, I cannot say, oh, my one client just had Mercury in Scorpio in the first house. That's the same as having Mercury in the eighth house. Not really, right? Because if someone has Mercury, let's even say Gemini, Mercury and Gemini in the third house, well, this is very objective. This is someone who wants to be heard through ways in which people listen to the way they think. They value the way that they are experiencing learning. They're valuing or they're learning to really heighten, right? Mercury and Gemini is a little bit more open with information, a little bit more forthcoming. Mercury and Gemini in the third house. Mercury and Gemini in the eighth house is equally interested in ideas, equally. But then the Mercury in the eighth house is more fascinated. It's less about objectivity. And so you can get Mercury in the eighth house where a person who's into secrets or uncovering secrets or having secrets or knowing a lot of different things, or there being things that you don't know about them, right? There being this kind of, hidden treasure of information, so to speak, if it's Mercury in Gemini 8th house, and especially if there's other placements, that can mean that person's a little bit more secretive. So in that case, to really understand that person, you have to probe, you have to go deeper. They don't want, nope, you're probably not going to get the answer the first time you ask that person. Because once you understand what each house, what happens in that house, okay? If thinking about Venus in the 11th house, social, it's networks, okay? Venus in the 11th house is going to in some way be attached to people who are not always from their family or from where they're from. That is a person who has to understand more their role within society. Okay. And that Venus placement is different depending on where you put it. So you can say, well, isn't it Venus? Well, if you put Venus in Aquarius in the 7th house, well, now it's Venus and Aquarius traits in the house of partnership, right? So this is not necessarily a person who's going to have 11th house themes unless they have 11th house energy. What's happening is that Venus in Aquarius is impacting their relationships, where they're having maybe different types of relationships. Maybe they don't have a specific type, but this person's going to value relationships because the 7th house is about that value, right? And that, well, Venus being in the 7th house is about that value of those relationships, and there's themes there. Whereas if the 11th house is empty in that person's chart, that's not exactly the same as saying someone who has Venus in the 11th house. It's going to create a different energy. And that is where we have to start to go a little bit deeper and understand full awareness what each house means. Signs are the traits. We all start baseline, there's the trait. And we all start baseline with the house, okay? Now, the worst that happens is it's a little bit inaccurate. It's not terribly inaccurate. I have no Pisces in my chart, but Pisces is my descendant sign, so that's probably not the best example, but I understand Pisces energy because I have 12th house energy, right? But my expression or the way in which I am, or the placement that influences some of the ways in which I express or deal with certain things is not going to be exactly the same as saying, oh, someone who is a actual Pisces individual. So it's essential to know what each house means, knowing the themes of the house, studying the themes of the house, and then looking at the sign as, okay, if this house means family and home, but I put Mars in Aries in the 4th house, what is that going to mean? That's going to mean something different, because Mars and Aries can't be the same as the 1st house. If I'm putting Mars and Aries in the 4th house, that means this is no longer just, this is about the individual, but now this is impacting their relationships in their home. So that is how I have to interpret that. But if I looked at that as like, oh, Mars and Aries, same as Mars in the 1st house, I'm missing something deeper than when I actually interpret what do those energies mean. And again, it's layers upon layers about how you choose to interpret your chart, how you get your chart interpreted, which you start with first. Do you start with the house or do you start with the sign? And for me, it depends on the chart, it depends on the person, it depends on the stellium, it depends on what are some of the major themes already coming about. But in interpretation, I do have to talk about the themes of the house, but then talk about how that placement impacts those experiences of that house, right? Because just because someone has a 4th house placement doesn't mean it's all about love and dove and family. It can mean there's conflict within the family. It can mean there's drama within the family. It can mean you feel like an outsider. If a person has Aquarius in that 4th house or something like that, you know what I mean? So it does become important to, one, know what the house means, and then understand what the placement means. And then if I put this placement here, how does this change the themes and experiences of that house? Does it align well with that house? Or do those signs kind of change the types of experiences you're likely to have? And that's how I would that's how I would address how signs and houses are not the same. All right, thank you for watching.